So do we know what APA stands for?
Fill me in.
Oh, no guesses? It's the American Psychological Association. There we go. I'm not exactly sure when it was started. I'm pretty sure it was in the last century at some point. It's designed to be a sort of a standardized form of communication. It takes all the literary elements out, not entirely out, but it's a more clinical approach is what you're supposed to do. Usually they're a very standardized form, so you can kind of pull up templates for a lot of APA assignments. In fact, pretty much any class you'll have where you'll be expected to write in APA style, more or less, your teacher will give you a template to say, hey, have an introduction section, have this section, then do your lit review section, and they'll all be headed appropriately, but we'll get more into that in just a second. The citations, a little bit different than MLA, but we'll get into that, the particulars in just a minute. They're supposed to be as plain and direct as possible, very straightforward, and there's a formula for it. And it's also used in the health fields of education, as we found out in journalism. No doubt there are some other studies that use the APA style. It's by and large used in health fields, that's where you'll see it the most, but anything that's supposed to be analytical or sharply critical, as opposed to something that's criticizing art or literature, it's more than likely going to use APA, sometimes we use Chicago style. But that's a different workshop for a different week. So this is kind of a repeat from last week, but why should you bother citing things? Feel free to use your knowledge you gained from last time.
To show where you got your information.
Yeah, why is that important?
So you don't plagiarize, and so people know that your points are valid, I guess.
People know that your points are valid. Yeah, it's good. That you're not just pulling it out of thin air. Yeah. That there's a real basis for what you're saying. And in the health field, or even education field to journalism, you can understand why that's very, very important. That you're not just inventing something because it feels right, or it came to you in a dream, or in your chicken noodle soup or something. So basically, you don't know everything. You can't know everything. Let's imagine you're actually, you have your doctorate of psychology. So presumably you've specialized in something enough to have earned the title of doctor. But even if you specialize in an area, there's going to be so many other areas where you're not specialized in. So even then, you still have to depend on other people's credibility to give you some information to sort of build on your own ideas. And of course, you want to acknowledge your sources. You want to acknowledge where you've gotten things from. Is that a late comment? Oh, she left. Oh well, more fun for us. So acknowledge your sources, and that kind of builds on the credibility thing. Because you can also check someone else's sources. It's not just for your teacher to say, let me make sure they didn't just get this off Wikipedia or something. It's to make sure if someone makes a claim that you think is interesting, you can check on that and see, okay, where's the foundation for this claim or this argument? Or if you think that someone's making a very bad argument, you can sort of go into their sources and see, are they using these sources correctly? Who are these sources? Who are these people? Why are they citing them as like a credible source of information? The differences between like flat earthers and normal happy people. So we know about flat earthers, right? You're nodding, yeah.
They're awful.
Yeah, and they do math and things like that to demonstrate that the earth as they claim is flat. But then there are other people who are, regular human beings with not substandard IQs at least in the triple digits, that will happily show you where they've gotten their information, and it's sort of I guess now centuries-long conversation that's saying, yeah, it looks like the earth is round. That's a pretty simple, hopefully it's not a sensational claim to make. And if you think it's sensational, you can check their sources. That's the thing. All right, so they're the basics of formatting. You all know this. It's the same pretty much for any style. It's the 1-inch margins all around, right? You're going to double space it. There's not really going to be a time where you don't double space, unless you're doing something like a table or some figures, things like that. We're not really going to cover tables that much in this because this is just the basics. This is just how to write kind of an essay in APA style, but there are ways, if you include a table like for a SWOT analysis, SWOT, that's something that's used a lot of times in business classes, we'll see those. Those will be single space because you just want to save some room. You want to use a standard font, just like MLA. There is no recommended font. There is no, you must use this font or else we'll cut off your left pinky. They just said it has to be standard, it has to be highly readable. and that's kind of subjective. But the ones you'll most often see are Times New Roman, Courier, Arial. If your teacher gives you a font to write in, just do that. Don't be a rebel. Just do it and make them happy. They're in charge of your grade. You'll also have to include a title page, which is something you don't have to do in MLA. And we'll go on to that in just a second. But that's something that's very different. Your page numbers will still start on that page. It'll still be number 1. In addition to that, you'll also have a running head, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And just to re-emphasize, it has to be done in a clinical tone. It can have these literary flourishes, especially in your intro or maybe your conclusion, but it's meant to be a really serious attempt at objectivity, where you're really trying to detach yourself from this material. And you can put the personal touches in the opening and the closing, because that's generally where you'll say, this is what I'm interested in, or this is why I'm interested in it, that sort of thing. And for the most part, just keep it simple, stupid. Do a running head. Do we know what a running head is?
On each page?
Yeah.
Headed?
What is a running head?
I was going to say the same thing. It just on each page. Like,
What on each
the titles on
The
each
title.
page.
Yeah, it's like an abbreviated version of your title. So here we go with running heads. On the first page, you'll actually type out the word running head in this, just like this. First word capitalized, and then second lowercase, like you're writing a sentence. Then a colon. Then you'll do a shortened version of your title, especially if your title is long. You want it to be sort of abbreviated, not like literally like FBI, but something that's just some keywords of your title. Every other page, you will not need the word running head or the colon. You'll just have to do your title shortened. There's a way to do it in Word. Has anyone ever seen that different first page button? It's a fun thing. Whenever you double click to go into the header and footer, right? You can either right click, or sometimes in the toolbar that will pop up, it'll be like a little checkbox that says different first page. Just unclick that or click that to highlight it, and then you can write. Basically, your first page will be different, but it will not carry on this formatting to the other pages. So you can do whatever. That's kind of a convoluted way to describe it, but it would be easier to show you, which I can. You'll also include page numbers, just like MLA, in the top right margin in the header. You don't have to do your last name necessarily, because the title is going to be a clue to what paper this is. So the fake title I made up was, Why My Grandpa is the Worst Grandpa Ever. That's way too long for a running head, right? It's going to go across the whole page, especially if it's in all caps. So you can just shorten it to Worst Grandpa, and then you have the page number off to the right there. Alright, so about the title page more in particular, it's also going to be double spaced, just like everything else in the paper. You're going to have to put your title first, about just above halfway down, like you'd see normally like in a book or something like that. You hit enter. You can put a subtitle if you have one. You don't have to have a subtitle. It's not like a law. They're not going to drag you out in the yard and shoot you or something if you don't have one. It's just if you think it's necessary. You put your name. If there's more than one author, there's a weird rule. If there's more than one author, whose name goes first, it's the person who contributed the most. So you can arm wrestle or whatever to decide that in a project. Oh, and then after your name or all the authors' names, you'll put the organization you're from. That's whatever school it's for, whatever institute you're associated with, whatever organization you're conducting this research for. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But for our purposes, probably just going to be University of South Alabama, College of whatever. Does that make sense? You don't have to include an abstract, but if you do an abstract, it's going to be on the page immediately following the title page. Do we know what an abstract is?
Is it similar to a cover page?
In what way?
I don't know.
It's all good. It's basically a ultra brief summary of the paper. Super duper summary of the paper is what I felt like typing last night. It's going to actually not end with whatever thesis or hypothesis you have. It's going to actually end with your conclusion. It's really supposed to be like an out and out, you can think of it in terms of spoilers, because the purpose of the abstract is to help people decide if what they're reading that you've written is relevant to whatever they want to study. Does that make sense? So they can so they can see exactly what happened and go like, oh wow, this is exactly key to my research, or maybe it's not, and they'll just toss it aside. To that end, to seeing if it's relevant to their research, you can help them out by including keywords at the bottom. Usually the word keywords will follow the double-spaced little paragraph or two of the abstract, It'll be indented about 1/2 inch, like a paragraph. The word keywords will be in italics with a colon, and then you'll put whatever keywords you want. It's up to you. It's not an exact science. It's just whatever things you think would help, like child behavior therapy or something like that. Anything that's just the keyword, something like you could put in Google. Does that make sense? Sweet. And once again, very clinical. In fact, it's the most clinical. Usually, we've had clients come in and ask us just to look at their abstracts. And about 4 times out of 5, it'll be a little too literary. It's not that it's badly written, it's almost too well written, if that makes sense. Like there are too many literary flourishes. It's like, hey, we just need just the facts. Just the quick PowerPoint kind of facts. All right, so now we get to the main body. 2 things you'll always have, of course, are the introduction and the conclusion. And they'll pretty much always be labeled introduction and conclusion. We'll get more into headings and how to format those on the next slide, or thereabouts. Usually for the middle bits, they'll usually be given by your instructor. The instructor will have some sort of rubric. They may or may not actually come right out and tell you, hey, I need this section immediately following, and then I need this section immediately following, and you'll just do headings that say those things. So in that respect, APA is a bit more rigid than MLA. In MLA, you get a lot of freedom. You can kind of arrange an essay however you want. In APA, you can still write whatever you please, but it's probably going to follow, like I said, a hard template. And that helps in many ways because you know exactly what you need to do next. And by knowing what the section is, because you've titled it a certain thing, you kind of get a good feel of when you're done with it. You're like, okay, I've done a literary review. Okay, I've done the special topics. So we have different levels of headings, right? This is where it gets really fun. There are levels of headings in MLA, but you so rarely see them. They so rarely come up. But these definitely help when you're doing very clinical and analytical discussions. So there are 5 levels of headings. It's fun. The first level is what you'll do for your title or any brand new section, distinctly different section. It's called the level 1, obviously. It's going to be centered, it's going to be bold, and it's in title case. So are you familiar with title case? It's kind of a new term, I think. It's when you capitalize something to look like a title, like on a book title or a movie title. You capitalize the nouns, the adjectives, these so-called important words. Not usually prepositions or things like that, or linking verbs or articles, unless they're the first or last ones, like that. So there you go. Level 2, it's going to be flush left. We understand the term flush. It's when flush just means when it's even with something, so it's going to be flush with the left margin, not centered like the title, like the level 1 is. It will also be bold, and it will also be in title case. Then we do the level 3s. They'll start out flush, but you'll indent them 1/2 inch, like you would with the paragraph. Does that make sense? Just 1/2 inch. Also bold, but now it's going to be in sentence case. Can we take a guess what sentence case is? Yeah, more or less. Except for proper nouns, like names, organizational names, and the first word, like you would with a sentence. Does that make sense? Oh, and also at the very end, notice we have not done any punctuation marks at the end. Starting with level 3, you'll put a period afterwards. And there's going to be a pretty good reason for that, which we'll see in the next slide. Level 4, just indented another 1/2 inch. So in total, it will be indented 1 inch. Does that make sense? Still bolded, but now you'll italicize it. Also in sentence case, and just like with level 3, it's going to end with a period. Level 5, it will be in total indented 1.5 inches, not bolded at all, but it will be italicized, sentence case, in with a period. It's a lot to take in, I know. And truth be told, the most I've ever seen in my time at the Writing Center, somebody went up to level 3. That was it. But I came up with an example that I think can just show you how to use all of the headings. It's just organizational things. If you have a lot to say about different aspects of something, that's why you want to do these different levels. So I said, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game is the title of my paper. All right, I like Yu-Gi-Oh! It's fun. There are a lot of different cards. So this level 2 heading, it's going to be about the cards in the game, right? So to say there are many types of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! In order to get a better understanding of these cards, here's a breakdown of the card types. So because I'm describing kinds of cards, I can go into level 3, because it's still under this heading. But it's just a little subgroup with it. So I've indented it the ½ inch, whereas this one was flush. It's indented the ½ inch, just like the paragraph above it. But it's bolded, so it's easy to differentiate. And whereas here with the level 2, I began the paragraph itself as a new paragraph, starting with level 3, the paragraph is going to continue where the heading is. Does that make sense? Just an organizational thing. I'm not sure why they decided it to be this way, but it's just something to keep in mind whenever you do it. And that's why you have the period. Just so people don't think it's some printer error that it's suddenly bold and not bold. That's it. So the monster cards, then there are different kinds of monster cards. So we talk about the effect cards. It is bold and italicized. Now it's indented an inch compared to these ½ inches. Bold, italicized with a period, then a space, and again the text is going to continue on the same line. And there are different kinds of effect cards. There are flip monster cards. Not bolded, italicized with a period, indented 1½ inches. And the text is going to continue on the same line. I think that was a pretty decent example. Are there any questions? Is there any confusion? Sweet. Just silence. Sorry?
I was just going to say, it kind of reminds me of, the levels on the, like an outline or something.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Like the dot was there, it's just without the little dot.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, like no bullets or anything like that. Yeah, just a way of organizing things, seeing how they cascade one another, how they build on one another. Right, so we have a references page. It's like it is the works cited page, but it's just called a references page. You have to call it references in APA, otherwise they scoff you out of whatever convention it is. I don't know. Literally titled references. An alphabetical list of all your sources, just like MLA. You'll do it last name, comma, first initial. That's the difference between MLA. In MLA, you do whatever their official title is, or whatever their name is on the publication. And this one, it's last name, comma, first initial. So we got Smith, comma, a period. Like you're abbreviating doctor, you have to put the period there. It's just something that when people are used to reading APA-style papers, their eyes are kind of trained to look for certain clues. And you're like, oh, hey, that's the initial. Okay, sweet. Do hanging indentations. Do we know what hanging indentations are? You do. You were here last week.
Yeah, like the top line is not indented, the second line is.
Yeah, the second and every following line. It's like the reverse of a normal paragraph. The top line will be flush, remember that term? With the left margin, and then everything else will be indented ½ inch to the left. And if we have any questions, I can show you how to do that on Word when we're done. It's no problem. It takes 2 seconds. There are no spaces between the entries. I actually saw an APA paper today where someone put spaces in between the entries, and it's like, wow, okay, just make the paper much longer. Because there are the hanging indents, the entries themselves are easy to see. The indentation makes it easy to scan and go, okay, that's one, that's one, that's one. Does that make sense? When it goes on multiple lines, you can kind of see that. The page numbers are still going on in this section with the same header. Pretty easy. They're constant throughout. All right, so now we get to the how to do in-text citation. It's distinctly different from MLA. It's not two totally different animals. It's the same idea, just a little bit different in the setup. So if you want to do the typical one, the one in parentheses, should do their last name or last names, comma, then the year of the publication. Does that make sense? And I think I have an example. Yeah, hemorrhoids aren't pleasant. Smith, 2018. Agreeable. So, of course, Smith is the author. 2018 is the year he or she was published. If you want to write the author's last name in the sentence, then immediately after that author's name, that's when you put the year in parentheses. That's the major difference. The only time you will ever need to do page numbers in APA is if you're doing a direct quotation. In APA, you're actually highly encouraged to paraphrase, and then just cite at the end of the paraphrase. In MLA, that's a little bit more dodgy. They really want you to always cite page numbers. Only do the page number in APA if it's a literal direct quotation. And you only really want to do a literal direct quotation if it's a substantial one, like more than 2 or 3 lines. If it's like a block quote, definitely. So Smith told a torturous story about hemorrhoids. You know, I didn't do this right. See, I put the citation at the end. The citation with the date should actually be right after Smith. So my bad. Even we immortals make mistakes. So what happens when you have more than one author for a source? Any guesses?
Alphabetical order? You put them in alphabetical order?
That's cool. That's cool.
What do they write?
Yeah, that's actually, that's one way to do it. I just meant if a source itself has more than one author. If it's like, Smith, Groves, and whatever.
Yeah.
There's actually certain rules for depending on the number of authors that contributed to an article. And that sounds weird, but in APA, it'll be studied a lot of times. And so there'll be tons of people's names attached to things. There was one, and it was some sort of Chinese study, and it just went on and on. I saw it on the citation page. It's like, oh my gosh, quite a lot. But that was incorrect, the person writing it all out. But we can talk about that. So if it's just 1 or 2 authors, you write them out. Right? In text, you'll always spell out the word and. So you're writing a sentence, Smith and Zappa, 2018, claim blah, blah, blah. If you're citing them at the end of the sentence, then you can use the shorthand ampersand. Smith and Zappa, comma, 2018. That's pretty easy. If it's 3 or more authors, you get to use et al. And we'll talk about that in a second. But it's the same. Again, you'll use and, ampersand, but we'll get into et al. In this next bit. After the first time, and I sort of have the slides sort of mixed up, but after the first time you've written out the citation, you're allowed to use this shorthand abbreviation et al. With the first author's first name. So in this case, it would be Smith et al. Smith, comma, et al. There you go. Oh, there is no comma for Smith. Again, another mistake. What is it today? So what is et al? Do we know? Have we seen it before?
I've seen it. I don't
Know what it means? Yeah. It is Latin from et alia, which means and others. And so once you establish that you have a source with multiple authors, once you've done that first in-text citation, you can just refer back to it with et al. If the source has more than 5 authors to begin with, you will not have to cite all 5 plus of those authors. You can start that with et al. Because then they can just look at your references page and get the full details. Does that make sense?
So this is in paper citing.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
There is a way to do it on your references page. We can talk about that in a bit.
Okay.
And this is just, I bring this up as a nitpicky point, but I see it a lot. There is no period after et. There is a period after all, because it's an abbreviation, like Mrs. or Doctor. Make sense? Short for alia, which means others, but et is like etc. Et meaning and. Okay, we'll also talk about this. Do we know what the Oxford comma is?
Yes.
What is it?
Isn't it the comma that comes before and?
Yeah, in lists of 3 or more
Yeah, it
links.
is, yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. For 3 or more items, it goes after each item in a list. I need eggs, grits, comma, and milk. I say this because the APA Style Guide, I'm going to say this to the camera, the APA Style Guide says you must use the Oxford comma. It's also called the serial comma. Live it, love it, you have to use it. We see it a lot, so we end up commenting on it here and there, or pretty frequently, really. It's a big deal because it can bring clarity. Especially in clinical papers, I notice a lot of students end up making long lists of things, and those long lists may involve clauses, entire clauses, where there's a whole verb doing a whole thing in this phrase, and the word and may appear in that phrase. But as long as you're still using the Oxford comma, people will know, oh, there wasn't a comma before that, so it's not a separate item in the list, it's not a separate action being performed. Does that make sense? That's very technical, but that's the idea. It's going to bring clarity. We invited her kids, Mao and Stalin, right? Chairman Mao, yes. If If you don't have that Oxford comma, the sentence becomes a little more ambiguous. We invited her kids, Mao and Stalin. It sounds like her kids are named Mao and Stalin. Whereas in the first sentence, it's clear. We invited her kids, Mao, and Stalin. 3 different groups, 3 different individuals, I guess, or recipients of this invitation. We clear? Is that good? That's the end of the show, but we talked about how to do multiple authors, like when to use et al. And stuff in the references page. You won't have to use et al. On the references page. I don't think you're supposed to. For 1 to 5 authors, write the names out. And you can use ampersands on that last page. If it's 5, if it's like getting to the 6 or more, write the 5th name, right all the way to the 5th name. They just put an ellipsis, space, ellipsis. Then you can leave out every name except the very last author on that source. Does that make sense? Very simple. That's about the most technical point I can think of. Is there anything else that sticks out people would like to talk about?
Let me ask you about that Oxford comma again.
Yeah.
On there, you said it's to separate. So this is just like is this just in APA writing or is this in all writing?
I would recommend it for all writing. I forgot to mention last week for MLA that MLA requires it too. Or they strongly advise, I guess is what I should say, because they're liberal arts majors, so they're not that pushy. But it's going to bring clarity, and the idea of using punctuation is to bring clarity to a sentence. Honestly, you can get away with leaving out a lot of commas, but if you're making a list, it does make it easier on the reader to have that last comma before and. Because we see people of all different writing skills and strengths, and all too often they'll leave out that Oxford comma, and I can't even relate how often it throws the sentence into confusion. Because in APA, sometimes, especially if you're like a nursing student or any sort of healthcare worker, you're going to have long, complicated lists sometimes, and it really just helps out.